say you have a shop on the high street, and in your shop you have so many great products that you know your customers would absolutely love. But the only thing that separates your products from your customers is your shop window. Now, unless you're able to design your shop window effectively, nobody will ever know how good your products are, because nobody will ever come in and have a look. And in this case, your title and thumbnail are your shop window, and the video itself is the product. So the more enticing and attractive you can make your shop window, the more and more people are going to come in. And it's exactly the same principle with your YouTube videos too. So even if we can improve these by even just 10%, you are going to see a massive difference in the overall success of your YouTube channel. So now let's first look at your thumbnails and how you can improve them. But before that, I want to let you know I have just released a brand new title and thumbnail mastery course where I cover everything to do with titles and thumbnails. It's got well over 20 different in-depth lectures of insane content you won't find anywhere else. And it will take you from beginner to pro within one simple course. Like, even if you think you're quite good at titles and thumbnails, I can promise you that this course will teach you something you did not already know. Now, it's been designed specifically for small and new YouTubers who are tired of uploading videos and still not getting any views. So if you learn stuff from this video, but want to take it a step further, for the next 24 hours, you can get my entire title and thumbnail mastery course for half price, and it will never be this cheap again. Link is in the description below. Come and join us before all the spaces get taken. Okay then, so your thumbnails. Now, I like to look at it this way. When someone is scrolling through YouTube looking for things to watch, they will be scanning so many different options at once. Your thumbnail starts as a
And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 248. Yes, sorry, I've just been told that there was another noise coming through while we were waiting to come on there. So apologies about that. Yes, not entirely sure what was going on. Anyway, here we are, technicals tripping us up as usual, even though we're nearly coming up to 250 episodes in. So yes, today is a feedback session. So Nadia, Susan and Janet have all sent in images for looking for a bit of critique and feedback. So that's what we're going to be talking about. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment, say hello, tell me what you're up to, tell me what the weather's doing, and we can get the chat started. And don't forget, of course, to like, subscribe, and do all the usual bits and pieces. And if I just do that, I guess we can make a start. Yes, so anyway. And well, yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Yes, usual technical hiccups, as you would have thought after well over 5 years of this, I would have got the hang of it, but no, still get tripped up every single time. Maybe one day these podcasts will become so successful I'll be able to hire somebody who can actually press the buttons for me. We can live and hope. Anyway, like I say, leave a comment if you happen to be watching live. If you're not watching live, well, you can still leave a comment. I just won't be able to read it out as we're going. So I can see we've got a couple of people in here already. We have Robert says howdy all from a somewhat mild and overcast Texas. Meg says hello everyone. Now interestingly, I don't know quite why in the little comments there's a little crown and a number 2 next to Robert and a crown and a number 1 next to Meg, and I've got no idea what those mean. Anybody else know what these symbols mean in the chat rooms in YouTube? Let me know. Nadia says hi everyone. Susan says hello from a rather cloudy and muggy day in Kakubri. The good news is that next week looks great. Oh, that's good to know then. It is, yeah, it's rather overcast. I think there's could even be thunderstorms coming in later. Whether they happen here or not, I don't know. They'll probably hit Susan first because she's 9 miles slightly to the west of us here. So prevailing winds and all that. I mean, if there's lightning storms, Susan will know first, so she can let us know. Anne joins us from Texas, and Janet says hi from a hot Mississauga, already 30 degrees C at only 10 o'clock in the morning. Wow. It's going to be a warm day. Okay, right. So, where are we at? So, yes, today then... okay, actually, I'll tell you what, just before we get on to the rest of today, let's do a quick Smug Points update. So, in essence, what happened was last month we had May and June combined, or rather the last 2 months, in terms of the Smug Points. And the winner by a good 10 points there was Anne, with a combined total of 115 Smug Points, followed by Robert at 105, Fiji at 100, April at 50, and Meg at 70. What that means is Anne was our winner, so she gets to choose the challenge for this month. Now, she's already sent me an idea, so I'm going to chat about that at the end of this podcast, so stick around. And if you really can't stick around, don't forget to come back and tune in, because, of course, all these podcasts are recorded. So while this is podcast number 248, it means there are another 247 of them all sitting here on the YouTube channel. So you can tap into them, or you can tell your friends about them as well. So yes, as I say, don't forget to click like if you like the video. Then as we're going, I think occasionally YouTube might even show it to somebody else, but on the odd occasion we occasionally get somebody turn up and say hello. We did last week. Not always guaranteed though, but yes, the likes, all that kind of stuff certainly helps the algorithms. Right, so let's move on to today, and today is feedback session. So like I say, Janet, Nadia and Susan have all sent in images looking for feedback. Are there ways to improve the editing? Are there ways to improve how the photo might look, or could they have done something different, either taking it or editing it? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So Osho, Owen, I think it was, joins us, says g'day. So you haven't told us, Owen, are you actually tuning in from Australia, where it must be about the middle of the night? Or are you, because I seem to remember there was an Australian connection, and certainly the g'day helps with that, a bit like Robert's howdy in Texas. Or are you an expat somewhere sort of located elsewhere in the world? Do let us know. It's always kind of fun to know where people are dotted about the globe. Unless, of course, it's all strictly top secret and you don't want anybody to know. Oh, Tasmania. Okay, right, cool. Okay, well, so it is late. I appreciate you staying up this late and to join us. Excellent. Right, okay, so where are we going to get to? I think what we're going to do then is we will start with Nadia. And Nadia sent in this picture of the Tay Bridge in Dundee. And she says, I was in Dundee at the weekend, but unfortunately didn't have my camera with me. However, I did have my phone. I wanted to capture the curve of the bridge and the old remnants of the old bridge. Now, just for anybody who doesn't know, that Dundee in Scotland sits next to the Tay and the big firth that goes out into the sea, and there's a bridge that runs, and it's quite iconic because it comes in, it crosses the river, and then it has this big curve in it. And in different places, depending on where you are in Dundee, you get a sense of how much that curve is there. And but there's another aspect to Tay Bridge, which is back in 1879. I think I made a note somewhere. Yeah, 1879. There was a terrible disaster with the original bridge, where I can't remember the exact number, but somewhere close to 200 people lost their lives when there was a storm and the train was going and the bridge collapsed under it. It's still one of the biggest rail disasters in British history, and the second biggest one in Scotland, I think. Now, what that does mean is that when they rebuilt the bridge, they built it more or less right next to where they didn't put it on exactly the same pilings, but they built it sort of just a few feet essentially to one side of it. So this means that when we look at the photo, we've got the bridge here, but you can actually see some of the old remnants of the old bridge. Some of them sticking out the water to varying degrees, occasionally little even more raised bits. So when you decide you want to take your photo of the Tay Bridge, that can be another aspect, is do you want to get in bits of the old bridge as well? And how much of that shows also depends very much whether the tide is in or not. So there you go, a little bit of history about the Tay Bridge as well as the photo. What have we got? Oh, Robert says, yeah, nice curve and leading line. Susan says, loving that curve, Nadia. Not the usual view of the bridge. It's true, it's not the usual. A much more common one is there's a place called the Law, which is like a hill in Dundee where you go up to there and you look down, and then you can kind of, from a heightened perspective, you get that sense of the curve as it goes across the river. Anyway, Nadia goes on to say, I cropped this image to have the line of the water start at the corner to lead the eye to the remnants of the old bridge and then to the curve and to the curve of the bridge. I would like to see your take on editing the image. Okay, so there's in a way, this is a good basic edit of the bridge. You know, what we've got here, where Nadia's placed herself. We're getting that sense of sky, we're getting that sense of sea, we're getting this real sense of curve, and it sort of goes up to the top here and swings round. Blue skies. Now, if you wanted different light, you would have to be standing at the other side of it, or you would have to be there at a different time of day. So for being there at this time of day with this kind of conditions, it's not a bad shot. But Nadia's wanting to know, is there something else you could do with it? Well, what happened then was I asked her if she could send me the original unedited version, which is basically this, and as we can see, more or less what she's done is crop it in. But there are other possibilities of ways you could go with this. So if I just open this with Photoshop, and here we've got, so yep, the first thing is the crop, which is what she's done, and she's kind of pulled it down a bit. This chunk down here isn't necessarily, showing us much more, so you could kind of bring it in. Now, depending on how much you wanted to go, you could go full kind of cinematic. Something like that is playing around with the crop, gives you this real kind of panorama, this sort of sense. I think almost the lower, wider, more cinematic crop gives you, I think, that maybe slightly more of a drama. It emphasises the line somewhat more, whereas the original one is more about the bridge in the space. It has and we're more aware of the foreground, in this case, part of the tidal bits of seaweed and mud flats and what have you. I think also, though, but if we take it down to a kind of similar kind of crop to what you had, let me just check. What crop did you have? No, not that one. There we go. Okay, so you've gone for a little bit there. So let's kind of do something similar like that. We can take a crop. There we go. Now, I think, actually, let's just pull that down a fraction there. As it stands, like I say, I think it's not a bad photo. But I don't know that there's a lot else I would do kind of in colour with it. I mean, you can play around with colour gradings. I mean, if I go to here and I go to colour lookup, for example, and click on options here, so tension green, all sorts of different kind of late sunset. Looks a bit more post-apocalyptic, I think, rather than late sunset. Different kind of film grades, futuristic bleak, all these kind of things. So you can do things like that, but I don't know that that's necessarily adding that much to it. So what you could do, though, I think, is maybe go black and white. Now, if we just do a traditional kind of click black and white like that, then it doesn't necessarily do much there. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do, just to give us slightly more options here. I'll go into Camera Raw, where we can also, because sometimes when you're adjusting the colours, what also happens is you might want to adjust just the shadows or the kind of general lightness and highlights and stuff as well. So I'll click black and white, and that gives us our more basic black and white idea here. Let's move that over a little bit. And then what we could do, if we wanted, we could bring the shadows up a little bit, and then that sort of helps bring a little bit more into seeing some of the detail in there, because we've removed the colour. So what becomes important now is the notion of tonal contrasts and shapes. Then what I think we can do, if we go to now we're in black and white, up has come this option here, black and white mixer. Now, some of these colours won't make any difference. you know, red, there's no real red in it, or orange. Yellow, now yellow, interestingly, there's little bits on the sand, you know, we're kind of getting bits there, but I don't know, that's not really. The key thing here is going to be our blues and aquas. Now if we take, yeah, you see the sky, and we take it up here and it becomes very, but I think, you know, if we look here, if we pull it down and create more kind of a darker sky like that, I think that starts to look a bit more interesting. Aqua, that kind of, I think I'd just keep the aqua where it is. And overall, I think that kind of blue, darker blue sky, I think is a bit more interesting. Now at this point, if we go back to the light, bring the shadow up a little bit, you could even go to the clarity, and just kind of maybe something like that, or actually perhaps even contrast. Ah, yeah, I quite like that contrast there. Bring that shadow up a fraction more. Oh, there we go. And now I think we've got something that's maybe a little bit interesting. Now again, you can, like I say, you can play around as much as you like with this, but in essence, from this, which is the bright sunny day, to this, which has a drama to it, really. It's not so clear that it's a blue sky as such. You know, I mean, the blue has become dark, so it's got that kind of heavy, almost storm approaching kind of feel to it. So by and large, I think your options there, Nadia, are to play around with this. Going from the original photo that you had, you can play around with your crop, and like I say, with the crop, the only real way I can think of what I might do with this is actually to go much more in the way of maybe cinematic, panoramic, something like that. And the other option is to go black and white, or combination of both. But it's a nice place, a good position to stand where you stood in the first place. Other than that, your only other real options are basically turning up there at different times of day, under different weather conditions, and seeing how that changes the view. But I hope that gives you some ideas there, Nadia. Thanks very much for sending that in. And yeah, I think it is worth that notion of understanding that it's always worth playing with the crop, and sometimes that going for a more cinematic crop, sometimes go for a more square crop. It's always worth investigating. Just play around with it, even if you just end up settling back on your first thought. Have a quick go for the sake of the 10 seconds it takes you to play around with a couple of other crops. It is always worth giving it a go. And the other thing is explore black and white, because something like the bridge there is about the line and the shape. And if you want to emphasize the shape rather than necessarily the colours, then going black and white is a good way of doing it. Well, Fiji joined us and says, "Good evening, friends," and also a lovely view of the bridge. Meg also says, "I really like the curves of the bridge." Okay, Nadia says, "I like the drama of black and white." Thank you, Kim. Okay, excellent. Right. Okay, so let's move on then to Janet. Ah, yes. So Janet sent us, now let me just, this photo. So Janet says, "Here is a photo from Annapolis Royal in Nova Scotia. Since the building is on a hill, I had trouble straightening the image." And yes, I can kind of see this now. It looks like you've straightened on some level. It looks like you've straightened according to the roof line kind of guttering to that bit up there. Except for the fact that I think it still looks, and you've straightened it according to the left vertical. But I think if we start looking over here, it looks like the right vertical is tilting. It still kind of looks tilted rather than looking flat on a tilted road. So we'll take a little look at that. And she also says the parking sign, though, was a very annoying position. So this little parking sign here going right across that bit of window. And it's tilted as well, a bent one, which isn't helping our idea of what's vertical or not. But she goes on to say the parking sign was a very annoying position, so would appreciate any suggestion on how to deal with that, given that Elements, and Photoshop Elements, she does not have content-aware fill. Okay, So content aware or generative fill, there is a very quick way these days within Photoshop of removing something like that. However, if you don't have access to that level of sophistication, also that does have to be said that given the fact that it says Fortan Cafe licensed dining, and it also says it in that window there, I can guarantee you that content aware fill wouldn't be able to give you, or generative fill wouldn't give you the right kind of writing in the background. So we'll take a little look at that as well. Now again, I asked as always, if you are sending a picture through for critical feedback, if you can send me the original unedited version as well, it always gives me more options to be able to help you, because then I can see where you are coming from. Once it's cropped in, I can't see where else you might have been able to crop it, or if you've done particular colour edits, I can't see what other options there are, that kind of thing. So now this actually shows the original one, which actually, oddly enough, oh, that's done a strange thing there. I'm not sure quite why. I'll tell you what, let's just open that with Photoshop. Right, okay, there we go. I think that was just kind of Microsoft Pictures or photo editor not knowing quite how to cope with that particular RAW file. Anyway, seems to be fine now here in Camera Raw. Robert says very striking building, and says the colours are also eye-catching. Interestingly though, when we look at the original, we can see that the colours aren't quite so eye-catching. It was obviously shot on a much duller kind of day, and Janet has boosted the saturation to kind of really kind of bring out the colours with it. So let's take a little look at this, and what we've got, ISO 200, f5.6, that's all fine. So the key things, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at how to kind of make sure that the building feels straight, and then what we'll do is we'll look at how we can effectively try and remove this parking sign. Oh, Meg says the picture of the crown means top favourites. Oh, right, okay. Well, that's sort of shifting about there as to whether it's Robert and Owen also got a couple of top favourites there, and you did, Meg, and now it's disappeared. So yes, a strange one that. I don't quite know how that one's working. Okay, meanwhile, let's return to this. So if I click auto, does that do anything? Nah, not really. Tell you what, let's just brighten this. We'll bring the shadows up a little bit, highlights down a little bit, contrast a little bit, yeah, maybe effects clarity a little bit, something. I'm not sure. Let's not worry too much. Let's just get that open and see what happens. So we've got this. Now, the key thing here, what's making it slightly more difficult to understand how to get it straight, is it's not just a case of the fact that the ground is tilted and for that matter that the parking sign is tilted, but also you are looking up slightly, and so that you, with your camera, you end up with that slight kind of perspective distortion. So if I drag a guide, if I take a guideline here and I place it against the side of the building, what we notice is that there's a gap, you know, that actually it looks like it's tilted slightly to the right. But if I grab a guideline and stick it over here on the right hand side, we can, lined up with this, we can see that it tilts inwards on this side as well. So it's to do with the fact that we're looking up, and so we've got this kind of perspective shift thing going on. So one of the things you can do with this is if I just duplicate this layer for a moment, and then in Photoshop, I don't know whether it's the same in Elements or not, but I Photoshop T, this allows me to drag and sort of move things. So if I click on the outside, I can move it, make it bigger or smaller. If I hold down the Control or Command button, then I can grab a corner and move it about. And this is really what we're going to do. So I'm going to hold down my little Control button and I'm going to drag this top bit out so that it lines up with this line here. Then over on the right hand side, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to pull it out this way. So I'm keeping it flat along the top, but in essence what I'm doing is I'm just dragging it out a little bit so that the verticals on either side of the building end up being vertical. Because when you're not sure where the horizontal is, especially because this road is sloped, where the verticals are, that's going to be the bit that's going to make it feel like it's tilted or not. However, this does feel, if I just grab another one of these, it does feel, yeah, we can see this guttering line is off a bit here. So if I grab that top right corner here, again, hold down the control button and then actually lift it a little bit, but also keep it straight. So I'm now trying to line that up with the edge of the building and with that kind of roof part, something like that. Now we should, if I've got that right, that now should be straight. But if we look at the outside bit, it's kind of quite tilted. This corner is anchored, this corner is anchored, this corner's gone a little bit to the left, and this has gone left and up. Okay, but now I'll hit enter. But that gives us our straight building. So if you're looking to try and straighten something because everything's not quite there, it's just a little bit off, that's really the way to do it. Put it onto a separate layer, and then your Control T is your shortcut for Edit Transform, or Free Transform allows you to then usually find little bits. And different editing softwares have versions of this, and while I don't know specifically about Photoshop Elements, certainly the desktop version ought to be able to allow you to do something like that. Okay, so now we have the building as we want it. I don't need these guidelines anymore, so let's just go to View, Guides, Clear Guides. There we go. So I'm now back to this. Now we've got this. The next thing that you were wondering, you were getting fed up with was this parking sign. Okay, so I'll just duplicate that layer again so we can play around with it and show you what happens. That if I do a traditional spot healing tool and I was to just cover that, go down to there and let go, you can see that it's done some sort of kind of weird bits and pieces here. It's looking a few pixels either side of it and grabbing them and filling them in. And those few pixels in this case happen to be the edges of the window, and the whole thing looks utterly wrong. So that's no good. Another option here is where we use, the remove tool. Now this is one which kind of has the content aware fill idea. Now, what I do is I highlight the bits that I want removed here, like this, and then I let go. And now what this is doing a more kind of an AI generative fill. You can see it kind of moving along there. What's it going to do? Now, it has sort of cleared it, except for the fact the open now just looks weird because it doesn't do writing very well. The licensed dining has gone funny. The Fort Anne has definitely gone. It hasn't known to pick anything up over from this side. Now, I could start tidying up at this point, but I'm going to go back a level because you don't have that particular element of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to good old clone tool. So we go up to the little rubber stamp here and we're going to click on the clone tool. And now what we're going to do is we're basically going to have to do this several times. We're looking for one bit of pavement, one bit of the picture, and we're painting it over another. So if we take a look here at where it runs in front of us. So if I click here and I sample this little bit of where the curb is, I can move it over here, just line it up fractionally and then start painting in. So I can paint in the pavement down to there, and I can also paint in up to about here. Now it's not quite lining up, so I'll click over here, line that up with the bottom of the until we get to about here where it's no longer lining up. So now I click here, lined it up with the bottom of the window. Now let's give myself a little bit of space here. I'll click over at that part, line it, and now I can go here. You see, if I've gone too far over to the left, it starts actually repeating it over there. So I have to kind of take a little bit at a time there. So grab other bits and paint it in. And now I'll grab the top of this little window area like that, And you see bit by bit we start kind of layering up. I now grab this little bit of windowsill. I'll go a little bit further back with the windowsill. And now I can kind of paint that in. Get slightly more complex. Actually, I'll tell you what I will do. I'll grab this side for over here because there's less to play with. Now, what we're not going to be able to do is fill in this little bit at the back here where you've got the lit up bit. I don't know quite how I would rewrite and open into here without literally trying to construct things. It might in the end be easier just to remove this bit that says open. But as you can see, what we're doing is essentially working our way up and just painting in little bits. Now this is going to take us fine as far as we get up to the licensed dining. I think, I'll tell you what, we'll come back to that bit. Let's just get rid of this top bit of the parking sign here. Like I said, you might have to do it a little bit more carefully. And ultimately, we're going to end up where we end up with the problem of the rest of the window. Okay. Ugh, that's got really nasty quite quickly. Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to stop at this point. Now, a couple of different things we can do. While we don't have the writing here, we do have it over here. And in fact, we've got a whole window here to play with. Now, given the fact that I don't have enough letters to be able to copy over to create an E for the open and get rid of the other P, not without really getting into, I mean, you can, but at this point I would have to grab that little bit of an N to create the back of an E, then I'd have to grab something else and tilt it and swap it, and it would be a big ask for something which is only a small part of the picture. So to be honest, the easiest thing to do here would be to copy this window and paste it in. So what I'm going to do is I'll go for the polyac. So this allows me to kind of create straight lines, and I'm going to click here down to here, and let's just get a little bit of the woodworking as well and take that over. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this window and I'm going to paste it. I think it's just pasted it in the same place as it. Yep. Okay. And bring it over here. Now it's not fitting exactly without looking. So what we do is we make it slightly small, slightly less transparent, reduce the opacity so we can see where it's fitting and where it isn't. Okay. And at this point then, what I can do is maybe line it up slightly. And what I'm going to do, again, the Control T, the transform, because it's fractionally over, it means it doesn't look exactly the same. So we need to just tidy it up by grabbing a little corner here, and we'll slot that into that corner. This bit here, we're going to move into there. This bit, we're going to kind of line up with that. And then this bit, we're going to sort of line up with that, I think. Now, if I'm right, and I hit enter there, when we then take the opacity back up to 100%, yep, there we go. This now, I mean, it's identical to that, except for the fact very subtly shifted has moved in. And I think that ultimately, when you look at the picture, the parking sign has gone, and this just looks like two elements. Two windows the same. Now, the giveaway is the fact that the reflection in the windows is absolutely identical on both sides. Now, if you wanted to, if we go back to our original bit over here, what we could do is try and, I don't know, if I used, what would happen if I used the spot remove on this? Just actually got rid of that. Maybe that would give us a, yeah, that's not bad. So I could, and I'll just get rid of those little red lights that were in there. So that kind of gives us a bit of a, now what I could do under this is I could mask this top bit, go to the black, which will then show, having black at 100% will show what's underneath. So if I sort of do this, we'll then end up with our kind of reflection space underneath, something like that. Or what you could do is you could even reduce the opacity on that a little bit and just have, no, sorry, not that. Go back to white, maybe make that 36%. Just very lightly touch in, a little touch, something like that. And now it looks like there's a bit of a reflection, but we don't have that full strong reflection that we had over there. So it becomes less noticeable that the reflections are absolutely identical. Okay, so ultimately then, a lot of playing around, and how much you want to play around with this depends entirely on how obsessed you are with it, how much you want, where your cut-off point of it'll do. Okay, everybody's got a slightly different cut-off point of that'll do nicely, it'll do, I can get away with that, I'm fed up with doing this, I don't want to do any more of it, right? And so, you know, similarly up here where I wasn't maybe quite so tidy up on that, I could just as easily clone a bit of this woodwork and paint it in, oh sorry, I would have to do it on that one, clone a bit of this woodwork and just paint in little bits over here, and to touch, you know. So you can just grab little bits, and now at this point here, I don't think anybody would look at that photo and think, you know what, that looks like it's been swapped. Now the only other thing, oh yeah, I've just noticed this little light sitting in the corner. I think again, if we go back to here and we go back to the mask, put that in black, put that back up to 100%, and just we could, because there wasn't a light there, I think we can take, I've got to be careful here because the F on the fort isn't quite the same place. Do that, and then we've lost the light in the corner, and now it's definitely nobody's going to be thinking that it's the same window that we've got in. So with all that, now you've got this, and if you wanted to then go back and do whatever levels of editing with your crop and your saturation and your brightness, or replace the sky or whatever else you wanted to do with this, you can do that. But what nobody's going to be accusing you of is swapping out the window. So without generative fill, content aware, all these kind of new and AI swapping in and doing it for you, we can still go back to the basically the clone stamp for getting rid of the worst bits, and then the copy, you know, copy a piece, plonk it on, and then jiggle it into the right place. So hope that helps there, Janet. Interesting kind, like quite, in a way, quite fun to get back to the kind of older tools rather than just letting the auto things generate for you. Sort of reminded me that, oh yes, I can do this. So thank you very much for sending that one in, Janet. And I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some ideas of how to go in and start playing around with it. And Janet says, oh, that looks about right. Excellent. Right, well, just a quick reminder then that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, like I say, don't forget to subscribe, invite your friends, all that kind of thing. And of course, this bit here, which we're talking about with the critique section, there's very, very few places where you can get genuine critique and feedback on your photos, particularly for free, from a professional photographer. So if you want to make the most of that, then this podcast is one of the places you can do it. And what you need to do is send me your image, and you can either email me at kimayres.co.uk, so straightforwardly kim@kimayres.co.uk, or we have a couple of groups. We have Facebook group, where are we, there, and the Flickr group, or the Flickr group, then the Facebook group. Both of them, Flickr or Facebook, /groups /UPwKA, UPwKA for Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Place your photo in either of those groups or email it to me. Tell me what your sticking problem is. Tell me where the problem lies, and I will do my best to help. At the next point, we have a podcast where I'm giving a feedback session. So, and on top of that, you get a bonus 25 Smug Points. So Nadia, Janet and Susan will all be getting a bonus 25 Smug Points for this. Meanwhile, also with the Smug Points, if you happen to be watching, leave a comment here. Because if you leave a comment and let me know that you exist and you're here and you're watching, then you get your bonus 5 Smug Points as well, just for turning up. Right, okay. Where are we? Oh, Janet says, I'll give that a try during the week. Excellent. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to Susan. And Susan sent in, let me just try and find, so do that, and here we go. Here's Susan's photo. And so she's got a couple of poppies here. She says, I took a few images of poppies the other day, just poppies growing wild. They only survive about an hour after picking, so I had to work quickly. Is that right? Wow. Okay, I thought flowers, if you stuck them in a bit of water, would generally last a bit longer, but yeah, an hour. Gosh, I had no idea. They only survive about an hour after picking, so I had to work quickly. My ISO was set at 5,000, which is not my usual setting, so I think it could be a bit noisy. I don't have any noise reduction software. Your critique would be welcome on any aspects of the image. Okay, so 5,000 ISO is a very high ISO, and if we move in and we look here, then yes, we can see it is very noisy indeed. Now, depending on the software you've got, quite a lot of different kinds of software have some element of noise reduction. The other thing I'm struck with this is it's not uncommon to do flowers against a black background, but this does look rather dark. However, I asked Susan to send me the original, which she did, and where are we? I think, yeah, here's the original. Now this is interesting. This I quite like. This shows the poppies as nothing like as dark. So what we'll do is let's open this with Photoshop, and so we have the picture here. Now if we zoom in, this is where we see the amount of noise. Now I will say, if you happen to have it, let me just show you something. If I go to detail, I've got an option here in the detail to denoise, and if I click that denoise, you can see here applying denoise, estimated time 6 seconds. I think that's taking longer than 6 seconds. Don't know, it might jump up. I'm sure it didn't do. Okay, so here we go with the denoise, and that's really quite impressive. I think most of the noise has gone. It's still retained some of the sharp detail. This poppy now is really kind of looking a little bit like crinkled paper. You can see creases in it and what have you, but I'm really impressed with that denoise. However, much though I like that, and that's where I would now start moving on to edit, that we have to go back with the fact that Susan says she doesn't have a denoise option, so I'll take that off. But what we do have, and I'm fairly certain if you've got Photoshop Elements or an earlier version of Photoshop, there will at least be this little bit down here, which is the manual noise reduction and the luminance. And if we grab the luminance and we drag that to the right, essentially that softens out some of the blur. Now if you drag it too much, it tends to just blur everything to a point whereby you've lost too much detail. So in essence, this is the luminance is sort of blurring the noise, and what we're trying to do is find that balance the best we can. That without it, it's too noisy. With too much of it, it's not sharp enough. So somewhere in here is a balance whereby, okay, we're going to end up with some noise, but we don't want to end up with so much noise. We're going to end up with some blur, but we don't want to end up with too much blur. So we're kind of looking for a sweet spot. You're never going to get it perfect, because the moment you went 5,000 ISO and you didn't have noise reduction software, you were never going to get it perfect. But in terms of getting away with it, and also again a little bit depending on where it's going to be shown, because to be honest, if it's only ever going to be shown on the web, it's going to be shown on a digital screen, a tablet or whatever, nobody's going to notice. Okay, that level of noise you only notice if it's really printed, or you've got it on a digital screen and you really zoom in like we are now. Generally speaking, if you put it on social media, nobody's ever going to zoom in that much, and they can't zoom in that much for that matter. Most, like Facebook and Instagram, they reduce the size of your file anyway. So I'm going to sort of have this one, in this case, sitting at around 24. But I'll tell you what you can do as well sometimes is, depending on, if you go into effects and then just tweak the texture a little bit, that texture or even the clarity, that kind of, the problem is while it then increases the contrast, which you've lost slightly with the the detail, you then end up boosting the ISO a little bit. So then maybe you need to just boost the luminance a little bit more. But again, there's bits where you can play around. So now we've got that, I'm just going to hit open on that. So yeah, just over here, this is Susan's original. This is now the unedited but luminance bit with the raw file. Okay, now we've got this, we want to crop. Now, Susan's gone for a square crop. You could do, that's certain. I actually find if I just pull that up a little bit, there's something I quite like about that sort of slightly, and maybe even tilt it slightly, give it a little bit more of a diagonal, something like that maybe. Just maybe not quite as much. I'm going to do something like that. I quite like that as a tilt, to be honest, and as a crop. That space on the other side of it, that notion of give it room to breathe. Whereas this feels quite closed in, I think. However, it's, again, there's always with this, there are notions of taste, there's notions of personal preference. And I can talk about my personal preference and the way I would do it. You would do it slightly differently. And that's as it should be. You need to do it the way that feels right for you. So what I'm doing is I'm playing around here with my interpretation. Now, the next thing that I notice with yours is you've gone for a completely black background, but the poppies themselves feel quite dark. And for that, what we can see quite easily, that if I take something like the curves or the levels, let's say take levels here, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the background black. If I drag this down to the right, you see this essentially darkens everything down until we get to about there. And that's made the whole background black, okay? But what's happened is the poppies themselves have become quite a lot darker than they were originally. Now, so what we really want to do maybe is play around selectively. Now, depending on the software you've got, I can do, with a modern version of Photoshop here, I can go select subject. And it's pretty damn good, Photoshop, at selecting the subject. Here we go, it's kind of created. Now it's missed a little bit over here. So if I decide to grab the selection tool, I can just add a little bit in with that to get the little stamens. If I hold down the Alt button, it makes it a minus, so I can come back in, something like that, grab a little bit of that. It's maybe missed a couple of the thorns, but by and large, it's not bad. We've got a selection like that. Now, if you don't have it to auto select, so let's deselect that and start again. I'll show you other options. Now, again, traditionally, you would have some kind of quick selection tool, and what you might do is sort of drag it over, and then you have to kind of carefully drag it down bits and do this. And some bits it will grab more easily than others. That's not bad. Then it's filled in this bit, and then it's not done that bit, and what have you. So you can. It helps that there's a bigger contrast between the flower and the background in the selection. Another option actually is to select the background, is to hold on. This is okay, usually that works better. It's grabbing chunks of flower here. So if I put the Alt key on that and then drag this round, keep it in the black, still not doing it. Okay, so we're going to have to play around a little bit more. One other option as well is if we select color range and we select the black, something like that, then what we can see is it's selected pretty much everything else here, and then we can now we've got a background. What we can do with this is we can now, if I go to something like the levels, now what it's going to do is I can selectively only adjust the background as well, like that, you see. So that's one way of doing it. There is a slight problem with that when you've done that kind of hard selection, that sometimes the edges can feel quite hard. So if we go back a couple of layers, when we go back to the select once I've got this selected, if I go to select, modify, feather, and I'll feather it by, well, I don't know, about just 3 pixels. That's just going to give it a slight little fuzz so you don't end up with quite such a hard selection. Now when I go to my levels, I can darken it down, and there's slightly softer, it doesn't feel quite as to the absolute pixel. Kind of depends. How's that looking there? Oh, not bad actually. But you might want to play around with that. So that way that you can see here that you can move your levels here, and if you want to go back down to black, you can. Now, I think because of we selected here, we can just turn that to white. Just add in that little bit down here where it wasn't quite pulling it in. Something like that. However, having gone through all this, I do have to say that, you know, I quite like this slightly gradated textured background. You know, actually, I think I prefer it than against the absolute black. There's something quite... Now, maybe what you want is a somewhere in between. So let's take this, and rather than having it all the way down, where are we? I lost my... Somewhere I've lost this. And let's go back to... How do I get my levels back? I think I'm... Oh no, there it is. I dragged that into it. So if we go back to... Sorry, that should be 0. This is terrible, right? No, that should be 1. Okay. So I can drag that down and get it, but maybe I just knock it a little bit. Maybe I don't need to drag it all the way, or I could just darken it a fraction. But, you know, there's something about actually having a little bit of texture in the background that I quite like. So I wouldn't necessarily feel like you have to rush to have an all black background. There's something about this which I kind of feel works. Again, curves, you could do the same thing. Curves does everything. Yeah, that's just doing the same thing as levels. So, but anyway, essentially your key thing here, Susan, is about the idea of separating out the poppies from the background, so that if you want to darken the background, you don't end up necessarily darkening the poppies at the same time. Or you can, and if you do want to darken the poppies a bit, but not as much as the background, you've got separate control over what you're doing. Okay, so that's your kind of key thing, and you're looking for that selection difference. Your crop, play around with, like I say, I kind of get drawn to a slightly wider crop, but that's more my taste. But don't underestimate the idea of a slightly textured background. Nothing, it doesn't always have to be absolutely black or absolutely white. I think there's something, for my taste, there's something actually quite interesting about having a slightly gradated background. And I think the poppies then stand out, but it also creates an extra level of interest. Anyway, I hope that kind of works. I hope that helps there, Susan. So, in essence, then, your key thing about it is, if you're playing around, if you've got too much noise and you don't have a noise reduction software, you will at least have the luminance bar. So slide the luminance bar, play around with that. Sometimes maybe play around with the texture, or the clarity slider might help you just bring back a little bit of what you've lost with the luminance. But each time you play with it, you essentially up the ISO, degrade the image a fraction more with each level of edit. So you're trying to find that mark for you where you feel you've overstepped the line, you've not gone far enough, and there's a level of personal aesthetic judgment that comes into it. Once you've worked that out, it's then about understanding, separating out in your selection process the subject from the background, and then deciding what you want to do with. You want to lighten or darken the background, whether you want to lighten or darken the subject. But very rarely in editing do we ever actually get the same amount of lightening or darkening of both subject and background in the way that we would want. We end up darkening one and it darkens the other to a degree that we don't necessarily want. So that separation, I think, is the key thing. So work it again. There's multiple different ways of doing selection. whether it's selecting via colour, or it's selecting via selection brush, or it's selecting via the little button that says select subject and then modifying it a little bit. But that's the direction I think you want to go in to really make that work. Susan says, that's great, Kim. I've learned a lot of useful stuff. I might go out and get some more poppies and a much lower ISO. Yeah, I mean, basically, it certainly helps if you have a lower ISO to start with. You know, if you can get away with 100 ISO is the holy grail. If you can, certainly 250. Once you start getting beyond 800 ISO, depending on your camera, noise is going to start becoming a particular problem. So at that point, tripod or resting it on something, 2-second timer, you know, slow down your shutter speed in order to make sure that you can have a lower ISO or more light, depending on where you've placed it. Okay, so thank you then to Susan, to Nadia and to Janet for sending in the images, and I hope everybody else here has found something interesting out of what we've been talking about, and perhaps thinking about how that might apply to other photos of yours as well. So yeah, let's say bonus 25 smug points to each of them. Finally then, so what we'll do now, to move on to next week. So as I said earlier, back at the beginning of the podcast, Anne won the Smug Points challenge, so she gets to for May and June, so she gets to set the one for July. And what we decided to go on, she sent a couple of different ideas through, and the one that kind of appealed the most was, she said, her suggestion was breaking the rule of odds by featuring 2 elements in the frame. The 2 elements is a style I've managed to have a bit of success with, even though it's a bit of a rule breaker. So there's this idea that, generally speaking, one of the things you tend to find is when you're photographing a number of objects, odds tends to be the way to go. People will say 1, 3 and 5 tend to work better than 2, 4 and 6. And this notion of, I mean, like there's a rule of 3, yeah, I wouldn't call it a rule at all. I would call it a guideline. But essentially, how can you take 2 elements? Can you make 2 elements in a picture just as interesting, or when might it be just as interesting as having 3 elements, or even better than 3 elements? So that's what we're going to investigate next week then, is the power of 2. The power of 2, or double trouble, not entirely sure what I'll call it yet, but probably the power of 2. And then what I will be doing, so next week I will give you all sorts of examples of that, of how to make it work, and ways to think about approaching this topic. Then I will set the challenge for 2 weeks after that. Okay, so on the, what are the dates? So next week is the 13th of July, I will talk about the power of 2. On the 27th of July will be the challenge. So you will get to, in the intervening time, you go out, take photos to fit the challenge topic. And in between, on the 20th of July, we'll have another feedback session. So if you found it at all interesting, what I've been talking about for Janet, Nadia, or Susan today, and you have your own photo, whether it's similarly related or whether it's entirely different, okay, whatever your photo, whatever your problems, whatever your sticking points, send me your image, and then I can give you some feedback in 2 weeks' time on the 20th of July for that. Right, okay, I think that pretty much brings us to the end there. So yes, a quick reminder, you know, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres if you wish to support these podcasts. And don't forget, if you do want to take part, stick your images either in one of the groups or email me at kimayres.co.uk. Don't forget to subscribe, like, invite your friends, all the usual bits and pieces. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.